I'm talking about ADD, ADHD. They didn't even have a term for dyslexia. You know what my diagnosis was? Lazy learner. I stood by the sink when my aunt was washing the dishes, and she looks at me. You're just a lazy learner. If you would just apply yourself. Oh, I suppose my brain is a basset hound lounging on the couch sleeping all day. My aunt really wasn't as mean as the way I portrayed her, but it felt that way. For me, being a wise guy like that was a delightful way to deflect the all too familiar negativity that I had become accustomed to. Add a dash of rebelliousness and a facade of bravado, presto, I created a protective coat from which to cope. Useless remedial reading classes year after year just reinforced my self-image. I'm not capable. You know what the teacher's remedy for that was? Here, read this story about the pyramids in Egypt, and then answer the questions. That subject was as motivating to an 8-year-old as watching a snail get ready to take a nap. I'm a kinesthetic learner, which nobody knew decades ago. They didn't recognize that. To sit still and focus on reading was like trying to concentrate on catching a fly with chopsticks. We can't all be Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid. My inner motor buzzed with anxiety. Because of my learning style, I learn by experiencing and hearing rather than reading. I'd have had more luck learning to swim if they just threw me into the water. I was thrown into the academic pool and expecting me to read when somebody's splashing all that water in my face, obstructing my view. My anxiety fueled my engine. I could have lifted up off the ground like a 747. Well, at least a large drone. Whether sitting or standing, my legs and my feet went back and forth, bounced around, back and forth, continuously. If I was in one spot too long, the endless friction would create a crater in the tiled floor. Hey, put me to work helping a prisoner break out, put me behind the toilet on the wall, and in no time you'd have a hell of a big hole to the underground passageway. In high school, I got mostly D's and F's. The D's stood for didn't, and the F's for give a fuck. Professionals didn't know it was then. Most kids like me believed they were stupid. But I was lucky. I had been told I had an exceptional verbal ability. My 10th grade teacher says, "You are so articulate. You are obviously intelligent. You're just an underachiever." A new way to say you're just a lazy learner. The reading rules ditched me, so I felt no loyalty to the school rules. One day in high school, I walked out of class in the middle of the day. I decided to take a ride on the Long Island Railroad to go into New York City to see a Broadway play. As I walked down the street, the truant officer drove by and called me over. By then, we were all buddies from all the times I refused to go to school. "Why aren't you at school this time?" Well, my friendly, articulate conversation distracted him from his mission to get me back to class. I put on my best manipulative charm. And I asked, well, have you seen the Angela Lansbury in the Broadway play Mame? No, but I hear she's terrific. It would make a great school play, I said. Great idea. I'll mention it to the drama teacher. Next thing I knew, he waved goodbye, cheerfully smiled, and said, have a good day. By then, most educators had just given up on me. Looking back on this years later, I'm sure I just exhausted them all. But my immature interpretation at the moment was different. My triumph fed my pride. There's more than one way to bribe the bouncer. Give me an A+ for gaming the system. Then hand me a tissue to wipe my tears because nobody cared enough to set boundaries and stop me. Like Dorothy skipping down the yellow brick road to meet the wizard for all the answers she needed, the train to the city was to be my escape. I naively thought that were my answers to my difficult school problems. I walked around the city and I felt the mystique of New York. I felt the thick, humid air, and I imagined I was a character in a movie, and there's a camera filming me. I walked amongst the concrete streets and the dominating skyscraper buildings. The freedom being away from the pressures of school and the drama of pretending I'm an actor served a purpose. The streets were crowded with strangers carrying briefcases, rushing into the office buildings. Others carried groceries from the supermarket. There was always inevitably somebody shouting from the 4th floor window to somebody down on the street, "Don't forget to get me some milk. Don't forget to bring it home." At least 2 or 3 drivers in each of the 5-lane street leaned on their horns, blaring. It was as if their 250-pound body fell on the steering wheel and they fell asleep. Ironically, there is a sign in New York City, an official sign, "Unnecessary noise prohibited." Rules obviously don't apply to New Yorkers. The noise outscreamed my negative self-talk. Fleeing from the troublesome school difficulties, the chaos filled me with conflicting feelings. I welcomed the anonymity where I could hide, and a dreadful loneliness, feeling untethered. I was like a kite without a string. I graduated high school in 1968 with a general diploma, not an academic one. And this just meant I sat in the classroom enough to qualify as having attended. Leaving school behind, I floundered for several years, going from one low-paying job to another. I would sign up with a couple of temporary agencies, and I'd get an assignment answering phones for a receptionist who was on vacation. When that ended, I would get a factory job for a couple of months. I strung enough short-term jobs together to qualify for unemployment. I lived on that until it ran out, and I began the cycle all over again with a temporary agency. I lived like that for several years. At the time, you can see how mature I was proud of my self-diagnosed queen of gaming the system. In the 1970s, when I was in my early 20s, dyslexia became into awareness. After a few tests, an educator discovered one of my limitations. She peered over her glasses. "You have trouble with sequences. Could that be why I have trouble with math?" I asked. I sighed with relief and I welcomed her diagnosis. Well, yes, math, you need to take one step and follow it with the following step in just such an order. And it's hard for you to follow the sequence. Finally, something other than my laziness caused my struggles. It wasn't my fault. My shame lifted. A cacophony of all those negative sounds from everybody. You're a lazy learner. If you would just apply yourself, you're careless. But this time, it was like it was on the radio, and I reached over and turned it off. Those words have been living in my head rent-free anyway, so lightness replaced the heaviness in my heart. Now, this was only one of my learning difficulties. In my 30s and 40s, my pursuit of more reasons discovered more. I have visual distortions. Words and letters disappear, bounce around, and reappear. Most people learn their ABCs. Well, the letters between A and C disappeared. I learned my ABGs. The other day, I saw a sign that said, "John the Club." It made no sense, so I read it again. The I appeared and it said, "Join the club." Sometimes whole words disappear. Imagine a letter that said, "You have just won a trip to the Caribbean." But I saw, "You have just the Caribbean." Oh, I think, can't people write in full sentences? I lived in the Bermuda Triangle of the reading world. You know the Bermuda Triangle, things disappear. Yeah. As professionals discovered more, I also learned more. Most people, as they read, they see pictures and they're transported into another place. It's like they're seeing a movie. I only heard the sounds of the words that I was reading. And most of those sounds didn't make sense. It was like learning a foreign language, and you don't know what the words mean. But once I discovered this, I thought, okay, if that's what's been missing, let me visualize. That's my basset hound barking. So once I discovered it, I struggled to learn to visualize. You know, like when you put your quarter in the gumball machine, but nothing comes out? That's what was my answer to. Couldn't see the pictures. Sometimes if you knock the machine up the head, the gumball will spill out. But I've been knocking my head against the wall for years and it didn't work. Many years later, audiobooks became popular. One day, I was listening to one as I walked on the treadmill at the gym. Suddenly, I found myself seeing the story. I finally experienced the pleasure of reading. This basset hound lifted her head and looked all around. Going back to my 20s, for my own curiosity, I took a college class, The Universality of Emotion in Facial Expression. It was taught by the researcher Paul Ekman. Oh, thank you so much. That's my daughter. So it was taught by the researcher Paul Ekman. He was a pioneer in an unconventional field. Oh, I fit right in. Unconventional was my love language. The class itself became a stepping stone to what was to become my career. I became a hypnotherapist. When I learned to help people through hypnosis, what's very important to understand the facial expression and what's going on with your client. But more than the education itself, I met a woman in class whose wise words catapulted me into more than just my life's work. It was my calling. I complained to her, I'm so behind everyone in life. I have no direction, no education, nothing going for me. With her eyes focused intently on me, she nodded with acknowledgement. I went on. I meander around campus like a restless wanderer. Melancholy follows me like my shadow on a winter day. It sounds like you're having an existential crisis. Oh, my eyes widened. Oh my gosh, I think you're right. I think that's it. It's like my soul has been kidnapped, and I'm expecting to find it here in the teachers and the classrooms. The meaning of life isn't here on this campus. It's something you need to find inside yourself. Well, yes, but most people follow society's expected path. They go to college after high school, they find a partner, they have kids. I haven't done any of that. Here was the clincher. That's because you are a maverick. You're blazing your own trail. This became my mantra and my motivation to turn my life around. Ralph Waldo Emerson said it best. Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. My learning style used to be my kryptonite, but when I cracked the code, it became my superpower. I am a kinesthetic learner. In the science fiction novel Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, the character Michael describes the way he understands the world, and he calls it grok. He will grok the world. Now, technically it means to drink, but conceptually it means to understand something so thoroughly and intuitively as to become one with what you are understanding. What an awakening. My intuition is a valid learning tool. My struggle with learning ended when I found my own path. In the 1980s, I was in my 30s and I found an alternative school, American Institute of Hypnotherapy. It had to have been divine intervention because the skills needed for that were like they were custom made for me. I breezed through my studies. I found my niche, and the previous failure became my personal success. I have made a living as a clinical hypnotherapist for most of my adult life. I couldn't have done it without my husband. He was so accepting of who I am, and he supported me through all the schooling and through getting my practice started. In fact, he was so demanding. He demanded that if my computer froze in the middle of the night, I better wake him up so he can fix it. My husband is there. But I sure as hell, I may not have been much of a reader, but I sure as hell knew how to tell a good story. Telling anecdotes and metaphors in hypnosis is prime to helping people overcome their problems. How lucky I am to spend my days creating a world where clients are uplifted and empowered to conquer their problems. I was born to be a storyteller. When I was a child, I often had this fantasy that I was standing amongst people and reading stories. Even daydreams come true. This led to more success. I am an award-winning author. proof this lazy basset hound can find success.